Now, my guest today certainly knows what he's talking about. He actually served in the US administration. In fact, he worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency's Middle East and Africa Regional Center and was a US Army major. He resigned in protest at the US administration's complicity in Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people. Now, we've all got lots of questions. I've got burning questions that I'm going to ask Harrison Mann, who I'm talking to, who I should say now is the Associate Director for Campaigns at Win Without War. They are progressive foreign policy advocates who are, I think, needed more than ever, given the, I'll say, shit show which is enveloping the world. We're descending quite rapidly into the abyss, I would say, at this particular point. A very disturbing moment. But what the hell is the administration thinking? What's the strategy? Why didn't they soften up public opinion? Taking a look back at the shadow of the Iraq, the Afghan, Libyan wars, just the general situation in the Middle East. Who's the destabilizing powers in the Middle East? How does this all end? So many questions, Harris. No pressure, Harrison. But I'm gonna put some of these questions to you. Great to speak to you. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Very well. Now, look, let's just start. I want to know, why the hell didn't they soften up public opinion? Because if we look up, I'm a geriatric millennial. I remember the run up to the Iraq war, and it went on and on. The full blown works. You're Colin Powell, Secretary of State at the UN, doing this pack of lies presentation, which he later, regretted having helped facilitate one of the great crimes of that particular period. And it was just relentless bombardment in Britain to Tony Blair. We have the intelligence, 45 minutes till we're going to get bombed by Iraq. They've not softened up public opinion. How do you explain that?
Yeah, I think we can explain that with the 20 odd years between now and the '03 invasion of Iraq. And you could also add on to that, the Bush administration was so successful that nobody ever really had to make that case again, because what followed 2 decades of nearly constant war in the Middle East, and the American people really got normalized to the idea that even if we withdrew our large ground occupation, the United States would be bombing countries around the Middle East nonstop, no matter who the president was. And after Bush, Obama, Biden, and Trump all campaigned on pulling out of Middle Eastern wars or the war in Afghanistan. They kept those promises to varying extents, but none of them stopped finding targets in the Middle East to bomb, even if it was from afar. And so it's very hard, I think, now, especially with Trump doing so many new military interventions, for folks who are not super tapped into foreign policy or the news, to understand at the outset, well, why is this different? Why is it bad if Trump is bombing Venezuela? We've been bombing these countries in the Middle East and Africa for years, and nobody told me that was a problem. Big military buildup in the Middle East, I think, until Americans start, unfortunately, coming back in body bags this week, hard for that to break through as well, for the same reason, because folks wouldn't know that it's out of the ordinary.
What in terms of just talking about the shifting motives
Yeah.
that have been expressed, I mean, we had Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, suggest that it was because Israel was going to bomb Iran, and that caused, that would cause Iran to bomb US targets. So preemptively, the US decided to attack Iran for that reason. Donald Trump since has come out and said that actually it wasn't Israel that forced his hand, that I think they were going to attack first, and I didn't want that to happen. We had Trump talking originally about the protests, that's why the Armada was coming. Then it was about a deal over nuclear material and so on. I mean, there's not been a clear position. What do you make of that as someone who worked in the inside?
Well, as somebody who worked on the inside, I'm tremendously glad that I did not get assigned to a aimless war, right? That's already cost U.S. service members their lives, and 2 of the bases that have gotten hit, I served at. I was at the Navy headquarters in Bahrain. I was in Kuwait. that could have been me and a lot of other folks. I I think the Trump probably doesn't quite know what he got into this war for, but I think Rubio and Netanyahu do, and, like, one way to understand the constant shifting rationales, and you forgot another one they added, which was actually it's not regime change, it's not the
Oh,
protesters,
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not the nukes. We
Yeah.
we actually, I think the most official one now that Marco Rubio said yesterday is we need to eliminate their capacity to fire and produce missiles and drones and destroy their navy. So that's another one tacked on. So the reason they haven't had a steady rationale is I think uh, the actual aims of the Israeli government and some of their backers in DC uh, really still sound too horrible to sell to the American people, and that's they basically want to collapse the Iranian state's ability to function as a state, right? Netanyahu's goal and other, Israeli officials' goal is that Iran should no longer represent even a hypothetical threat to the state of Israel. And that means they can't have any weapons, might mean they can't have any industrial capacity. It means they can't really have a functioning government because nobody in Iran is going to be friendly to Israel, right? There's not You could fantasize about regime change, but you could magically have elections tomorrow. The person who won is not gonna say, "Oh, I'd like to make peace with Israel." That's not because of any insane Iranian ideology. It's because they've been tormented by this country for quite a long time and fought proxy wars with them. And so that's unfortunately an achievable goal. Regime change, extremely difficult. I would say probably impossible. Regime collapse, um, that's good enough. Certainly good enough for Israel and good enough for Iran hawks in the U.S. who have a similar view, which is that it's just unacceptable that there could be a country that exists in the Middle East that defies the United States and defies the state of Israel. Did Donald Trump have that in mind? Almost certainly not. Every report, including his own interview, suggests uh, he was convinced that this would be just like Venezuela, which he sees as a stunning success. It was basically a one-day military operation that immediately, as far as we know, installed a pliant replacement authoritarian. Now that that hasn't happened, he's got to figure out new ways to explain what's going on.
I mean, it's a really interesting point you made about chaos because a lot of observers have made that point that what Israel wants or it would benefit it most would be in Iran that collapses into chaos and is permanently weakened and hobbled. That is too risky for it to,
But
ends up even, with a different government because things could change in the future. It's a country of 90 plus million. It will always potentially pose a threat. Better to balkanize it and fragment it. William Hague, the former British Foreign Secretary, is a conservative. Um, he wrote a piece in the Times newspaper which says, "Well, actually, chaos wouldn't be it's not in the strategic interest of the US or the West in general." He said it would inevitably bring the need to intervene on the ground to allow, so it goes on like that. So he says basically that kind of chaos would be, not least for the kind of Western allies in the Gulf, would be a bad idea. I mean, what do you think of that? That actually that might be good for Israel, but is it good for the West strategically?
it's an abysmal outcome for everybody in the U.S., in Europe, certainly in the Middle East. Right? I don't want to overlook
Yeah, of
the
course.
human cost already in Iran. But what could state collapse look like? It means, like you said, country of 90 million people, refugees going both east and west. Um, Not an expert on European politics, but I would say some countries have struggled to adapt to receiving refugees politically, based off what we saw after Iraq and Syria. Um, you have a country that is filled with military equipment. They don't have nuclear weapons, but they have some kind of nuclear material. Imagine losing accountability of that, right? Imagine drones, uranium, what have you. Uh, we don't know where it is anymore because there's no government. So really, the only beneficiary, maybe, of collapsing the state would be Israel. Uh, but in the long run, I'm not even sure that would be true for them.
I mean, because Libya is an instructive example.
Yeah,
They had a population of about 6.4 million in 2011.
for
That is
sure.
a country which now, what, 15 years on,
Yeah,
remains, well, it's a failed state. It's got two different governments. It's had, various Islamist ISIS, for example, organizations which took over and actually played a big role in terms of, what we saw in terms of the refugee crisis.
yeah.
Also, a blowback in Britain in other ways. The Manchester Ariana Grande terrorist attack back in 2017, very much linked to the turmoil in Libya. Um, I mean, but we're talking about a country which is so much bigger and more complicated and diverse. I mean, it's what 7.4 million compared to 94 million people. I mean, it's not even. I mean, Iraq was what 20 million or so in 2003.
Yeah, I mean, all I'll add there is, right, anybody who says that they know how a military intervention there is gonna end is just lying, because you can't know, right? It's too complex. We can be sure about, the human suffering, and we could be increasingly sure about spillover in other countries. Um, and then, of course, the other outcome, which is also quite likely, right, is that the Iranian government survives, right? Israel and the US, it's hard to tell who's bombing what, is really trying to take out every echelon of leadership, right? Trump said they killed dozens of folks on the first day, including potential successors to Khamenei. They killed Khamenei as well. And then I just saw today that it looks like Israel bombed the the site where surviving politicians were meeting to choose the next supreme leader. I'm personally shocked that these guys are still meeting in public meeting sites, but the result of that, could be chaos. It could just be that the military ends up taking over the country, right? Like that's might be the most cohesive institution surviving, if an institution survives. Uh, I don't think that's. Go ahead.
Well, no, it's just a
Yeah,
key difference. I say, I mean, if you look at Iraq in 2003 and Libya in
yeah,
2011 and Afghanistan in 2001, notwithstanding that there is broad opposition within Iran to the regime, there's much more support for the regime
yeah.
than there was for Saddam Hussein in 2003, Colonel Gaddafi in 2011, or the Taliban in 2001.
There's no element, substantial element that's waiting to rise up if you just knock out Khamenei, right? I mean, like you mentioned, the Trump administration is apparently making entreaties to Kurdish groups, but there's not anybody waiting in the wings who could credibly take over the country, and certainly who could not overpower the military establishment, both in DC and Jerusalem. They may be thinking, well, if we bomb enough military leaders, maybe that'll be possible. But I think you'll just get to chaos then.
I mean, because we've heard about Donald Trump today talking about arming Kurdish leaders,
Yeah.
sorry, Kurdish militia. And that I've noticed Pahlavi, the crown prince, exile crown prince, um, normally very hawkish, constantly calling for bombs to rain down on his country. But he's sort of sounding off about to Kurdish militia, you are oppressed now, but they'll be different. Please don't secede from the country and the country break up. But when you're talking about, I mean, it makes me think: is that a response to proposed plans to arm those Kurdish groups on the border? Israel is bombing border guards.
Yeah.
That seems to suggest a promotion of the balkanization. Basically, the country just collapsed into a form of civil war because those Kurdish groups want independence. They don't want to stay part of a united Iran.
Yeah. It could be, again, goes back to, like, the only certain goal, and the closest thing they have to an achievable goal is regime collapse. I would add the Kurdish leader. I'm not gonna pretend to be an expert on, Kurdish separatist politics. I'll just say if they are not young men, they'll remember what happened every other time, a Kurdish group let the United States use it as a pawn against the enemy du jour, and it almost uniformly, ended in disappointment. So, I don't know what they'll do. I think you should be wary, especially, if you think you're getting the backing of perhaps the the US leader with the shortest attention span, of what exactly might happen to you if you decide to go all in on a US-Israeli regime change plan, or regime collapse plan.
really striking examples of the 1970s, the Kurds of Iraq, when the then pro-US Iran and US cut support for the Kurds at the particular time. Um, just in terms of, I mean, look, Trump says he's launched this war to keep to make Americans safe, to protect. What do you just make of what this means for the safety of American citizens, given that's what he's talking about?
It's obviously made us less safe, like every single Middle East intervention the United States has conducted in my lifetime, every single arming and propping up of authoritarian regimes. I wanna call out the framing that just Donald Trump didn't invent, right? That uh, Islamic Republic of Iran is inherently a threat to the United States, because it's just not true. Uh, you see that as accepted wisdom from politicians on both sides of the aisle, from the media, that Iran, through its existence, is a threat to the United States of America. Why? Because we've fought them or they fought us in the past, because they don't like us, because they say death to America, death to Israel. Uh, but the reality is they are located in the Middle East or in Southwest Asia. They don't have the capability, nuclear or conventional or otherwise, to attack the United States of America, even in symbolic ways. And yes, they can range our bases around the Middle East, and we've put military bases in every country all around Iran, and notably, we invaded the countries to their left and their right. We haven't thought about how that made them feel, but we've seen, right, especially as all kinds of wires got crossed after October 7th. Uh, the Iranian government was extremely reluctant to ever attack U.S. forces, and yes, it had missiles and drones that could hit our bases. We're seeing that in practice this week, but it was clear they did not want to start a war with the United States. So it's just simply untrue that they posed a threat that demanded immediate attention, and it's untrue that they posed a serious threat at all. And frankly, if you're really worried about U.S. troops in the Middle East getting hit by Iran, you could just move them out of the way. They don't need to be there. You don't really need to leave forces around the Gulf, in Iraq and Syria, where in my view, all they really do is serve as a convenient punching bag for folks who don't like the U.S., without really delivering us much back home. And if you didn't want to do that, you could still just not start a war with Iran, because let's remember, they were not firing missiles and drones at anybody a week ago.
Why do you think they've launched this war?
Who's the they?
Well, yeah,
I
define.
Right? So there's a few actors here, right? There's the Israeli government, Netanyahu. There's Donald Trump himself, who is a unique character, who I think we can assess does not have any deeply held ideological or geopolitical beliefs beyond enjoying the spectacle of violence and beyond enjoying things he can call wins. And then there's the entire, you could call Iran war industry. Jamal Abdi, who's the head of the National Iranian American Council, wrote a great article in The Nation under that title, Iran War Industry, about decades of Americans who've been pushing for war with Iran. John Bolton, I think, is the most famous and memorable among them. So Israel, Netanyahu wanted this war because his conception of safety for Israel is that no state can be allowed to exist that could hypothetically threaten the safety of Israel. They could hypothetically attack Israel. Doesn't mean they're attacking them, but they can't even have the capability, right? So the idea of Iran existing was too much for him, and that's why he's been lobbying for 40 years to try and get the United States to go to a war with Iran for him. And we have to remind everybody, Israel, some aspects of its military advance, some are not. It is a small country. It is not capable of invading Iran. It's not capable of bombing Iran for a long time. And as we've seen over the past year or two, it's not capable of defending itself from Iranian counterattack without intensive U.S. military support. So that's why Israel did it. Why did everybody around Trump do it? And I think Rubio is a good avatar about this, but there's a million members of Congress who feel the same way. They have a similar view to Israel, which is no country can be allowed to exist not only that may threaten Israel, but that really dares to defy the will of the United States, right? There's a vision which transcends the Israel lobby and people who care about Israel, a vision of American global supremacy that a lot of folks can't let go of, which I think is very explanatory for like the '03 Iraq war invasion, that it's just not acceptable to have countries that dare thumb their nose uh, at the United States. And then finally, you got Trump himself, who probably, like everything, has not made his mind up about much, but really feels like he's on a roll after his other military interventions, foremost among them Venezuela, which in his eyes was a massive success, knocked everything out in 24 hours, no Americans killed, and immediately installed a friendly, pliant authoritarian in the place of the slightly less pliant authoritarian. And so he almost certainly got talked into this or went into this thinking, wow, I did so great in Venezuela. We can probably repeat this again in Iran now that the first 24 hours didn't go the same way as Venezuela. I think that's why we see him personally uh, struggling and stuttering to explain what he's doing with the war, and the statements from the rest of the administration reflect that.
They've talked about having off ramps.
Yeah.
How they started a war. Um, Iran then said that they're not interested in talks. And you don't have to be some sort of oh, pro Iran stooge, or whatever, to think, well, that's actually quite rational, because otherwise you just what they try and do and then get bombed again because they've been bombed during peace negotiations twice. How how does this war end? How would the US extract themselves from it without looking like they've been humiliated because they haven't achieved anything?
Yeah, so, I think there's 2 or 3 ways that this war ends. So, one of the war aims that was recently announced by Marco Rubio, who I consider the I don't agree with him on anything, but he's sort of the most clear-eyed and rational member of that administration who at least thinks about what he says before he says it. He announced, "Actually, our goals are, destroy their capacity to manufacture and fire drones, missiles, destroy their navy." That is theoretically a very achievable military objective. Those are all points on the map. US intelligence agencies have been working for years, for decades probably, to identify all of Iran's missile sites and missile factories. If you wanted a mission accomplished moment, you could say, "Hey, we bombed all the points on the map. We got them. Here's photos of the blown up factories. I did the 3 things I said I was gonna do. We're going home." Right? That is one potential way out of this. What they can't control, as you intimated by mentioning off ramps, is, well, what if Iran still has some missiles left? What if Iran has some drones left? At that point, the ball's in the Iranian government's court. Who's the Iranian government at this point? I'm not quite sure. Is there even gonna be somebody capable of negotiating on behalf of Iran, if they even want to? But you could see after enough time has passed, and after Iranian leadership feels that they've given the United States and Israel and its Gulf partners enough of a bloody nose to deter future attacks, they say, "Okay, you guys can say mission accomplished. From our point of view, we've inflicted enough damage to feel safe for the time being. Let's have a ceasefire." But there's a lot of ways that that doesn't happen, right? That they even if an off-ramp is offered, they don't take it. A, because they feel, well, we haven't actually inflicted enough pain to prevent the United States from doing this again. Or maybe there just isn't somebody left who can actually easily negotiate and turn off the fighting, right? You've seen the Iranian foreign minister say, "We're doing this mosaic defense." Subordinate commanders have been given autonomy to attack at will. Right now, the United States and Israel are actively trying to assassinate all of the leaders who could tell those commanders to cease fire, right? That's a possibility too. And if we end up with an Iran that is unwilling or even unable to capitulate, I worry about the scenario that that certainly the Israeli government is interested in, which was basically the Gazification of Iran and destroying any infrastructure that could even hypothetically be used to threaten Israel.
I mean, on that, I mean, look, we've seen horrific atrocities committed in Iran, including the slaughter of 185 or so little girls in a school. We saw in Gaza limitless depravity just normalized. We just watched every single war crime in the book committed, the first live stream genocide. The argument that people made at the time is if this is normalized, then you will see this barbarism unleashed elsewhere. I mean, is that what you're worried about here? Which is that what we'll see is what was normalized in Gaza rolled out in Iran.
Yeah, it is, and let's remember, as this is all going on, the United States is still blockading uh, Cuba using very similar tactics that Israel used in Gaza and has resumed fully using with this war as a pretense. Yeah, I think the justifications that Israel has used to basically cripple all infrastructure in Gaza, you can easily apply them to Iran if you want, right? Okay, they can't have religious or military leadership, that's too dangerous. They can't have a navy, that's too dangerous. They can't have their missile factory, sure, that's too dangerous. Well, you can make a Shahed 136 drone uh, in a lot of different places, right? Maybe you could turn a car factory into something that can manufacture that. Does that mean, well, maybe Iran can't be allowed to have industrial capacity, right? Can't be allowed to have industry because you could use those to make drones. Ukrainians are famously making drones in their garages, right? So the that logic could frighteningly be used to really just maintain a endless bombing of Iran.
You mentioned Cuba. I'll be in Cuba in a few weeks' time, I believe, reporting from there. So watch this space, everyone. And just in terms of the political situation in the United States,
Yeah.
um, some might go, "Well, come on, surely the Democrats will learn the lesson." A lot of them piled in, obviously, behind the Iraq War. The Democratic establishment did, the likes of Hillary Clinton, but the whole apparatus at the time. They obviously Afghanistan they did, and did under Barack Obama the surge as well there, and had their own mission accomplished moment. And they did Libya directly. Have they learned the lessons?
Yeah, I'm hoping that's not a rhetorical question. Have they learned their lesson? Slowly. Let me say this. So I work for a progressive advocacy organization. My colleagues right now are working to try and get Democratic members of Congress to vote against Trump's war in Iran this week. There are very credible fears that uh, there will be a substantial number of defectors. Um, right? We don't have an anti-war party in this country. I would say most of the successful anti-war politicians belong to the Democratic Party. There's one or two who caucus with the Republicans. But back to your earlier point about why aren't the American people more up in arms about this? Is there's a lot of political leadership on both sides of the aisle that is totally fine with Trump bombing Iran, or at least doesn't feel like making a big deal about it. And so bombing Iran is something a lot of, again, Republicans and Democrats, or at least a substantial number of Democrats in Congress, are also excited to see happen. And, all the better if it's under Trump, so they can avoid any blame. Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State for Joe Biden, uh, who also oversaw facilitation of the genocide in Gaza, famously he wrote an op-ed after Trump bombed Iran in June 2025, saying, "Well, I don't totally agree with this, but it's actually pretty good if it worked." Right? And that's somebody who's in good standing in the Democratic foreign policy establishment. And so I think there's some Democrats who are not going to learn their lesson this week, but they're going to learn their lesson when they go up for election soon. On a more hopeful note, in response to Marco Rubio basically saying, we did this war because Israel made us, which is a claim I'd like to interrogate further in a moment. We saw some surprise. I saw some surprising commentary from Democrats who don't normally speak in a really outspoken way about criticism of Israel, saying, "No, this is totally wrong. Netanyahu doesn't decide when we go to war," and so I think slowly some folks are picking up that this is actually good politics, not just opposing the war, but opposing a war that looks like it's for another country.
I mean, just finally, how long do you see this potentially lasting? What kind of general scenarios can you see? Because, I mean, there is the whole declare victory and go home
Yeah.
approach. Um, but you could say, I mean, it looks like he's boxed himself into a corner rhetorically. How could you? What's your sense of where this is going as things stand? Based, it's only what we're 4 days in.
Yeah, and let's remember that Trump himself has been fairly explicit that this could be an endless war. His War Powers report to Congress said we don't know what the scope or timeline of this will be, and he did a Truth Social post saying, "Don't worry, we have enough munitions to do this war forever." He used the word forever quite astonishingly. So the way this war ends quickly is that Trump feels like he's now tethered himself to a losing proposition because enough Americans have been killed, because Iran has punished the Gulf states enough that MBS and MBZ are calling him and Jared Kushner every day saying, "Hey, you got to put this to an end." And whoever's running Iran acquiesced to ending the war. That, unfortunately, I think is the best case scenario, is that Trump gets tired of this quickly, And really the other scenario is that Netanyahu and Trump go for broke and continue destroying infrastructure, kill anybody who could be a potential civilian or military leader of the country, and basically keep bombing Iran as long as they can. And right, the consequences of that is a lot of dead civilians, more dead people on U.S. bases in Israel, and I think the Gulf states, generationally ruined basically because they are the cannon fodder for this war. They're the soft target that Iran knows it can hit to try and pressure the U.S. You may have seen reports basically. Forces in the region, U.S., Gulf, and Israeli, are running out of air defense interceptors. So as that happens, if Iran can still keep some of its missiles and drones hidden, we're going to see a lot more destruction, a lot more casualties on the other side of this war.
A grim place to end, but we have to deal with reality as it actually is. But really, really incisive and really, really thought provoking stuff. So for everyone watching, please like, subscribe, leave your thoughts, leave your comments, share the video. But Harrison, honestly, really appreciate it.
Thank you.